Over the time of only 17 years, Nochem Baldsteiner from Lemberg bore 4 different legal names. His traditional Jewish name remains unknown, but in 1785 he adopted the name Nochem Bilka. This name was Germanized in 1787 until it was illegal in 1802 and was altered again into Baldsteiner. This weird example highlights the difficulties of Austrian name policy towards the Jews of Galicia, which attitude changed in a short amount of time. Today I would like to present the first of these name regulations of Galicia. As an important step towards modernization and emancipation, Jews adopted steady names around 1800 all over Europe. This fact is widely known among scholars as well as in popular culture. Accordingly, it's not a surprise that we find a huge amount of books, articles, and encyclopedias about this issue of names of Jews and their names that all give the same chronology. In 1787, German Emperor Joseph II implemented the first edict that required his Jewish subjects in most of the Habsburg lands to adopt fixed German names. This law was an initial spark, inspiring all other German and Central European states to implement own name laws for their Jewish inhabitants. While a variety of scholars already investigated the events in different regions, only one article dealt extensively with the emergence of this first Austrian edict of 1787. This article by Wenzel Jacek, however, concentrates on the events in Bohemia. Aside from these facts, the adoption of surnames is also linked to popular myths and legends, tales of anti-Semitic German-speaking clerks who forced ridiculous surnames upon repentant Jews go around in popular culture and also in academic literature. It's not hard to detect the origin of this narrative. In 1880, Austrian novelist Karl Emil Franzos published the short story Namensstudien, Name Studies, which describes the events going on in the Austrian province Galicia 100 years earlier. He stated that in 1782 Galicia stood under military administration and depicted how military commissions created names for reluctant Jews. Moreover, he provided an amount of unbelievably ridiculous surnames allegedly worn by Galician Jews like Pulverbestandteil, Wanzenknicker, and Blutsauger. You see the translations there. And Franzos indicated that rich Jews could buy beautiful names while ugly names were forced upon the poor. Supposedly because of this entertaining story and the incredible examples, Franzos' novel was thankfully absorbed by newspapers, humorists, and also scholars since its first publication, and hereby made its way into our contemporary knowledge and academic literature. The alleged events in Galicia became synonymous for the whole process of name adoption by Central European Jewry. Although Franzos' trustworthiness has been doubted at least since Erwin Manuel Dreyfus' work of 1927, surprisingly there hasn't been any academic attempt to research the history of the whole topic in order to prove it with sources and put it on solid ground. Quite the contrary, since Franzos' story has been repeated over and over again, now it seems to be unshakably true. In this light, we have to add a big question mark to our so-called knowledge. This question mark stood at the beginning of my research. Based on original archival material from Austria and Ukraine, I proved that the Namenspatent of 1787 had a predecessor in Galicia. And today I will portray the emergence of the Austrian policy towards the Jews in Galicia that subsequently led to the implementation of this first Galician name regulation in 1785. Crucial point of my presentation is to highlight the necessity of combining onomastics and etymology with historic research. I will show that the implementation of name laws did not emerge from empty space, but was a product of a long political process of modernization and interwoven with it. Therefore, I have to start with a detailed historic retrospect. During the first partition of Poland in 1772, the Habsburg Empire annexed a huge territory that was given the name Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, usually shortened Galicia. Galicia was inhabited by more than 2 million people, of whom approximately 150,000 were Jews. These huge numbers caused the traditionally anti-Jewish Austrian officials some troubles, for this annexation doubled the size of Jewish inhabitants within the Habsburg Empire. So far, the main aims of Habsburg Jewish policy under Empress Maria Theresia had been to limit or to reduce the amount of Jews and to use the remaining as a source of income. This policy was also favored in Galicia. However, the situation in the new territory was rather complex. Simply, there were too many Jews to conduct massive expulsions, while Jews were too important for local economy. Moreover, Old Polish laws protected the Jews and granted them a special legal status that differed from all other Habsburg territories. Therefore, the Old Polish system was temporarily kept, yet tightened up by two regulations in 1773, while the aim was still to limit the size of Galicia's Jewry without improving their living conditions. A first law, can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. A first law, or Judenpatent, for Galicia was implemented in 1776. But it based on the older regulations and was anti-Jewish in its core. The law limited Jewish communal autonomy as well as permissions to marry, introduced new taxes, and simplified methods of becoming expulsed as begging Jew or Betteljuden. A generational change took place in 1780 when Empress Maria Theresia died and her son, Emperor Joseph II, an avid supporter of enlightenment and modernization, succeeded her. Joseph's attitude was a physiocratic one. The well-being of his subjects would lead to increased productivity and therefore to a higher prosperity for the whole state. Accordingly, he tore down all boundaries in order to turn his subjects by reform into useful citizens. In this context, the agenda for the Jewish inhabitants shifted from restriction towards assimilation. They should not differ anymore from their Christian neighbors, should abandon the ancient customs and occupations and become useful citizens as well. This progressive policy was, after all, a purely economic one, primarily aiming for economic prosperity and stability in the Habsburg core territories like Vienna, Lower Austria, and Bohemia. Simultaneously, the Austrian administration was less interested in improving the living conditions of poor Jews in the eastern provinces. Moreover, they feared pauperized Jewish masses from Galicia to stream into the heart of the empire. The ambivalent reform policy therefore meant to free the western, that means wealthy Jews, and keep the eastern, that means poor Jews, where they were. The emperor formulated the precise tendency of his reform policy in his Handbillet of May 13, 1781, which served as a pattern for every of the following provincial Jew laws. Basic aim was to abolish the Jewish national language, which meant to banish Yiddish and Hebrew from everyday life, correspondence, and bookkeeping, and to send Jewish children to public schools. Other aims were to abolish Jewish communal autonomy at all and to encourage Jews to take up new occupations like farming. Summarized by several educational measures, Jews should be turned from customers to producers. While, as a result, local Jewish tolerance edicts were implemented in every of Austria's provinces, as you can see here, Galicia stood on a much lower level, and hence a programmatic reform for Galicia's Jewry was temporarily postponed. The need for an all-comprehensive Jewish tolerance edict for Galicia was overdue and became more urgent when all parts of the Habsburg Empire implemented such laws, while the heavy problems in Galicia and in the east remained unsolved. The implementation of an ultimate Jewish tolerance edict for Galicia was planned in two steps. First, a provisory Judensystem, Jew system, was prepared in order to reform at least the most urgent aspects of the Theresian system. After that, the real and final edict should be worked out. The work on the provisory, the first step system, began in 1782 as a cooperation between central officials in Vienna and officials of the Galician provincial government, the Gubernium, in Galicia's capital Lemberg, with the following key topics: abolition of all remaining Jewish autonomy institutions, promotion of agriculture and handicraft, a tax reform, and strengthening of the German language. Before the officials knew how to regulate the ultimate Jewish legal system, they had one important problem. They had to know precisely the amount of the Jewish population in Galicia, their distribution and wealth. Statistic methods in order to count the Galician population had been used before. Since 1773, annual censuses were conducted. so-called conscriptions or Konskriptionen. The results, however, were rather imprecise. In 1773, about 224,000 Jews were counted in the conscription, whereas a year later, in 1774, only 170,000 approximately appeared. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a lot. Yeah, millions. No. Okay, 171,000, yeah. The reason for these immense fluctuations was primarily bad methods and circumstances. Jews were registered in population books or Populationsbücher, which were continued the following years. The officials in charge, however, worked sloppy, soon causing mistakes, sometimes even ignoring hundreds of towns and villages. Another problem was the hostility and anxiety of Jews towards these conscriptions, resulting in various strategies to avoid them. On the one hand, they knew that conscriptions served fiscal surveillance and therefore could result in expulsion. On the other hand, religious doubts about being counted were of importance. The unreliability of the conscription methods was clear to the administrative bodies in Vienna and Lemberg, which worked on the new system. Accordingly, a new system whose aim was to change the existing regulations radically had to be preceded by a reform of the outdated conscription praxis. And I quote the Hofkanzlei, which is the governmental authority in Vienna. After tearing apart the existing order and Kahal concentration, nothing further can be done in our assessment without assigning the whole Galician Jewry into new communities, electing new elders, and implementing a new body of evidence for conscription and taxes. As a first step towards such an improved conscription, officials of the Galician Gubernium discussed the implementation of new family books or Familienbücher, which were supposed to be kept more thoroughly. In this regard, the demand for stable family names was mentioned for a first time in a suggestion by the Gubernium in Lemberg. I quote, "Every housefather should be imposed with a surname that will remain steadily for him and his family." The Hofkanzlei in Vienna responded in September 1784 and specified the keeping of family books. Every community had to keep an own family book and list every tax-paying householder of that community or from surrounding localities. And I quote, "But since the existing custom that sons use their father's names as their second name caused various confusion, every Jewish householder should choose for themselves and their offspring alike a steady, unalterable family name, which will be entered into the family books." So, family books were the starting point of the whole reform. They were the tools with which the authorities could control the Jewish population. Who appeared in them had the right of residence, while the ones who could not pay the tolerance tax did not appear in the books and were deported as begging Jews. Due to the huge work, the Galician gubernial authorities postponed the conduction of the conscription or conscription for a couple of months until February 1785, until which they sent very detailed instructions to the local governmental and Jewish authorities. You have a picture of this instruction. So the instruction says that messengers rode from place to place. No, one step further. Sorry. Next step was the division of the new communal borders and the appointment of a main locality where the conscription should be conducted. Messengers rode from place to place to inform the scattered Jewish population about the date and place. On that very date, all members of a household who were older than 12 years, including servants, had to appear in front of a commission consisting of Christians and Jewish communal officials. After asking the householder about the occupation and marriage license, the commission began the so-called Namenskreierung, or creation of names, which is specified in the instruction as follows, and I quote, "The Jew has to be asked which family name he has or wants to choose. If there are several families in linea descendente, all have to adopt the same name." This short instruction and this overall instruction is the first name regulation for the Jews of Galicia as well as a modern territory. As we learned, Jews had the choice between choosing a name on their own or receiving one by a member of the commission. The instruction specified further that different Jewish families were not allowed to adopt the same surname and suggested, in order to differ the names from each other, derivations from the place of origins or territories. These instructions, as well as the term creation of names, point to the assumption that the authorities expected to create much more new surnames than to accept old ones. We do not find any restrictions on first names. Every first name could be retained as long as it was kept forever and never changed, while every other second name, like patronymics, had to be discarded. At the end of the conscription or conscription, Galician Jews bore one first name and one surname. Aside from the name, the occupation, classification and tax revenue were registered into the books, which formed the basis of future taxation and toleration of Galician Jewry. The conscription began all over Galicia on February 1st or 3rd, it's not clear, in 1784 and took until March, partially even until May, and remains unclear whether it was completed everywhere. In the rare examples from Lemberg that I examined, I could not find a single name of the pattern of Galician derisive names, that is, no single compound names and almost no names with ridiculous meanings. Exceptions could be names like Umschweif, Geplagt, Ohngeld, or Einäugler, which I could translate now, but maybe I do that later. Some names derive from occupations like musician Hersch Musik or the distiller Benjamin Brandwein, while the vast majority of names derive from locations. Often these etymologies are visible only at a second glance. For example, families from the village Zimna Voda, which means Kaltwasser in German or cold water in English, bore names like Zimmer, Kalt, and Kaltwasser. The same corruption of names of localities can be found in many other villages. For example, the family Kamen from Kamienpol, Porza from Podborce, Gaia from Gaia. Only a minority wore traditional surnames or patronymics like Cohen, Rappaport, Herz, Bär, or Fischmann. The question in every case is whether the Jews or the German-speaking officials choose the names. The derivation from place names, as suggested in the instruction, could be an evidence for officials, but it is hard to prove that. Also, no misuse is known, which does not indicate that it did not happen. We cannot find so-called beautiful names for the rich and ugly names for the poor. The names do not give any indication on the wealth of their bearers, as almost every family belonged to the same tax class. And in every case, the conscription had no effect on unmarried women's names. Single women and widows did not adopt a new surname, but kept the first name of their late husband or father, for example, Taube Mendel or Hanna Itzig. The new provisory codex for Galicia's Jews, called Preliminar Patent, was implemented May 27th in 1785 and marked an important step towards the final tolerance law of 1789, which, after almost 8 years of preparatory work, completed the Josephinian reforms of Galicia. The names, however, were not as steady as they were supposed to be. Only 2 years after the conscription, in 1787, Vienna implemented a Jewish name regulation for all parts of the Habsburg Empire, the famous Namenspatent of 1787, which laid down new rules concerning Jewish names. Parts of the Galician names were retained, while many others were altered into the typical pattern of Galician compound names. Accordingly, the reminiscence of the first Jewish name regulation of 1785 disappeared. Conclusion. I could prove that the Jews of Galicia were legally forced by the government to adopt steady family names before the famous date of 1787. I depicted the emergence of this regulation in every detail in order to embed it into the historical context. Only this way I could highlight the argumentation of the Austrian officials and their opinion on the importance of Jewish names and naming. The result proved that the adoption of names in 1785 was not part of an enlightened campaign or an instrument of assimilation. The issue of names was not even mentioned in the Galician Provisory Tolerance Edict of 1785. On the contrary, above all, the adoption of names was a fiscal necessity, which was unavoidably in order to reform the legal and the tax system. The name's only importance consisted in enabling the authorities to distinguish individuals from each other, and accordingly, their etymology, meaning, language, and structure were totally irrelevant to them. Although Germanization of the Jews was already in use, was already an issue for Austrian lawmakers, And contrary to later regulations in different states, the process of naming was not yet part of this discourse. My research does not prove that any kind of misuse of anti-Semitic clerks, bribery and so on did not happen. At least I could not yet find any indicators. It proves, however, that the alleged facts of Franzo's Namensstudien cannot stand up to the historic scrutiny, and that we should stop using this fictional story as an historic source rather than treat it as what it is, a well-written legend. Thank you very much.
Questions? We have just a few minutes, 2 minutes. Questions? Comments?
You said there were 4 different names that came from a town name meaning cold water.
Yeah.
Did the record actually say this man comes from this town and now his name is this, or is this a guess? You see Coldwasser and you guess that he comes from this town.
No, it's he lived in this town. So all these.
That was the town he was living in at the time.
Yeah.
Ah.
Exactly. I don't know where they came from. It's just the name. I don't have any indications where they came.
It's a guess. You see people in this town and you see they have this one is now named
Exactly.
Coldwasser. Okay.
But it's like an obvious guess. Like
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any list of villages surviving which in this village these names were adopted or imposed? Or
To my knowledge, until now, I just know one of these family books, and this is from Lemberg, and also consists some of the villages surrounding Lemberg. So there are only like 400 families listed in this book. I'm still searching for other books from other regions, but from this time, 1785, I just know this one surviving book.
It's innovations. But if one existed, then probably they existed, at least existed. I don't know whether they're still around somewhere. But
I don't know. I mean, from later years, like the following family books sometimes exist still, but not the original ones from 1785. But
is it available somewhere? Or it's
not online. You have to go to Ukraine.